Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. On behalf of the Texas Indigent Defense Commission's Family Protection Mentorship Program, I am honored to welcome you to this presentation, Preventing and Addressing Burnout. The CLE application for this program is currently pending, and I'll send that around as soon as it's available. But we are very, very lucky to have with us today Attorney Paul Jacobs. He's an attorney and TLAP professional with the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. He has been working there, helping connect judges, lawyers, and law students with mental health and addiction resources they need. In addition, Paul speaks publicly to increase awareness and destigmatize mental health and substance use disorders. Paul is a very decent human being. I am very honored to have him here with us. He brings a real wealth of knowledge and experience, lived experience in this space. In our practice, we have a real crisis of burnout in the CPS practitioner world. The child welfare is a very difficult area to practice law in, and we need our community, we need support, and we need tools to help address and prevent burnout. So Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, at the end, we'll have an opportunity for a facilitated discussion to discuss what we learned. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, my name is Paul Jacobs. Glad to be here. Grateful for the opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope. Appreciate the kind introduction. When you introduced me, Natalie, as a decent human being, I recall some years ago, I was playing in a charity golf tournament in Minnesota. And I started focusing on a concept called sympathetic joy. And sympathetic joy is the concept of changing your brain chemistry or practicing mindfully, intentionally, being happy for other people's happiness, having joy for other people's joy. That's something I wasn't born with. Some people are more adept at that than I was. And it's really important, I found in the practice of law, to do that because, we can get competitive, we can get comparison, we can get envious and jealous. So we got to try to find joy in other people's joy. So I was focusing on that. And so when someone hit a good golf shot, I was truly happy for them. I really practiced it. I was sincere about it. Because the old competitive Paul would have been hoping for them to miss the putt so I can win the hole. I mean, that's the brain chemistry that I came up with as a competitive first athlete, student, and then trial lawyer. But so after the round was over, I know this is a long story, but after the round was over, one of the people I was playing with was a retired IBM engineer. And he said to me, he goes, "Paul, you're such a pleasant fellow. I'd like to play golf with you again." And normally that's just a very kind compliment, nice thing to say. But I started racking my brain, and I've been called a lot of good things, a lot of bad things, but I couldn't remember ever being called pleasant before. So this concept of sympathetic joy, I'm really practicing more and more. So thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for the introduction. So again, my name is Paul Jacobs. I am a legal professional, staff attorney at the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program full-time. I graduated University of Houston Law Center in 1984. I graduated Arizona State University 1981. I played college tennis. I was on the debate team. I did civil trial law for most of my career. The first 5 years, I defended corporations, insurance companies. At one point, I was the attorney for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus in Texas. Then I was recruited, and I did mainly plaintiff personal injury, products liability, insurance litigation, catastrophic loss, medical malpractice, again, primarily on the plaintiff side. For over 20 years, I had my own firm. At one point, it was called Mallier and Jacobs, and then Jacobs Single Lusby, and then the Jacobs Law Firm. So I had tried maybe dozens, if not over 100 lawsuits. took hundreds, if not over 1,000 depositions, many mediations, thousands of hearings. And then reason this topic is so important to me, and one reason I'm looking forward to sharing it is after about 25 years of practice, I burned out. I didn't, even though I understood intellectually mental anguish, I understood intellectually pain and suffering because I prosecuted it essentially on a civil side. I didn't realize that not only was I burning out, but I was suffering from the consequences of compassion fatigue that we'll talk about a little bit. And so, because I had catastrophic losses, I had clients with major significant bodily injuries. And this is something that y'all deal with. You deal with secondary trauma, other people's trauma in their lives that you are responsible for. And I was responsible for, from a civil standpoint, their ability to get their medical care taken care of, or their lives taken care of, or their financial condition taken care of because of the serious injuries. And over time, it wore on me. At the same, so I had symptoms of burnout that we'll talk about that I just took as a failure on my part, that I couldn't concentrate like I used to, couldn't think as clearly as I used to. And we'll talk about more of those. But real briefly, I burned out. I didn't have the outlets, the tools that I'm going to talk to you about. I didn't understand the tools at the time for various reasons. And I chose to self-medicate because I felt I didn't want anyone to know about it. I had too much shame. So one of the purposes of this presentation and my share is to try to destigmatize mental health issues, to try to destigmatize substance use problems, because I developed an addiction to several substances because of my disease. I try to keep trying to, I would treat my symptoms of burnout with one medication, and then the symptoms and side effects of that medication with a different medication. It was just one drug after another, and alcohol on top of that, to try to cope with my symptoms rather than taking time to get help, recognizing the impermanence of the condition, and moving on. And so it was pretty serious. So right now, after several years of being in a really dark place, I got so ill that I went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I admitted myself into their addiction program. I also turned myself over, I surrendered, if you will, to the medical doctors because I had other medical problems as a result of my using and my lack of self-care. And I spent almost a year at the Mayo Clinic healing physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then I came back to Texas, and about 3 years ago in January, so it's been about 37 months, I've been working here at TLAB, helping lawyers, law students, and judges. I've been sharing my experience, strength, and hope, speaking at law schools, speaking at different seminars, symposiums, writing articles, and just trying to let everyone know that this addiction does not discriminate. I was almost 50 years old when I became a full-blown addict, addicted to the medications that I was using to try to deal with my symptoms rather than asking and accepting help. So one of the things I want to promote today is the power of asking for help and the power of accepting help. I got to the point where I was willing to ask, but I still had the fear of accepting help. So I want to talk a little bit today about TLAP, what TLAP is, what we're here for, try to destigmatize TLAP, if you will, let you know that we're a caring, loving, confidential support system for the State Bar, Texas, and then talk a little bit about what is burnout, talk a little bit about the statistics of why TLAP's important, what's going on in the legal industry about mental health issues, talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms of burnout, how trauma can affect that. And then towards the end, I have some tools, some evidence-based tools, suggestions on how to deal with burnout when you're having it, and then some tools and suggestions on hopefully how to prevent it once you're more aware. So trying to, how do we change this slide? It's not moving. Maybe you can help me. So I'm going to have to put it on this design if that's okay, because it wasn't moving. So as I shared with you, I had not only trauma, secondary trauma from some of my cases I handled. I had primary direct trauma from the judges, direct trauma from my clients, direct trauma from opposing counsel, and physical trauma. I got some serious injuries that led to me getting, as well as dealing with my burnout symptoms, dealing with severe physical pain. And one of the drugs I was prescribed for my severe physical pain was opioids. And back then, we didn't know, or I didn't know of the addictive nature of them. And it also changed my brain chemistry. So at one point, I was using these medications to stay highly functional. I won hearings, I won mediations, I won trials while I was on medications for my symptoms. And then at some point, that high functioning addict, if you will, which is a myth that we'll talk about, I became functional. Most lawyers who can become quite functional while they're addicted to whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, other behaviors, because of our most of us are highly intelligent, we can compensate. A lot of people won't realize, or we're putting so much time and effort into one thing that other parts of our lives, like our family or our health, is dysfunctional. And then there's no direct link between highly functional, dysfunctional, and you don't know, it's not straight line downward. It can be going slow and then a complete drop. So for me, I can't tell you when I went from highly functional to dysfunctional, but it happened. And then I made a commitment. I surrendered to good orderly direction, if you will, at the Mayo Clinic. I got involved in recovery programs. I got very active in healthy communities. I have not had a drink, a drug, tobacco since February 28th, 2019. So next week will be 6 years of complete sobriety for me, and I am very grateful. And I feel so much better. I still have the severe medical conditions that led me to need opioids 6 years ago, but by changing my lifestyle, building a healthy community, and doing some of the things I'm going to share about, I'm grateful to say my pain is gone, my spiritual pain, my emotional pain, and my physical pain. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, so let me thank you for allowing me to share that with you for a few minutes. There's like I said before, I stayed in a very dark place for several years because of my shame. I was ashamed of anyone knowing that I was having I was in so much emotional and physical pain. The shame is a cycle for me. I was ashamed of myself, so I would use to avoid the shame, and then I'd be ashamed of using to avoid the shame. It was horrible. And so there is a concept that talks about shame dissipates when you're able to share in a safe place. So I want to thank you for allowing me to feel safe to share this. So, and I hope if you all have questions, or if you ever have something's going on with you, whether it's calling me, calling TLAP, I suggest that you have somebody in your life that you can share things with, so your feelings can dissipate, because you have nothing to be ashamed of. We may feel guilt. Guilty is when we do something we're not proud of, but shame is making us think that we're a bad person, and we're not bad people. We just sometimes do things that we're not proud of. So we need to learn from those things rather than be down on ourselves. So let's talk specifically about the practice of law. There is research that says the law is the most stressful profession. And it was the Washington Post several years ago. And a lot of experts talk about stress and being perceived stress. And so if you're doing something that you really feel fulfilled about, you're doing something that you're focusing on the process, not the outcome, there's less stress that we'll get to. A lot of stress is when we're trying to control outcomes. So this is some of the issues, some of the problems for attorneys. Obviously, we have stress, we have anxiety, we have a high rate of depression, we have a high rate of burnout, we're exposed to secondary trauma, we have a culture of drinking alcohol as a tool for our stress. We have a culture of taking substances, whether it's alcohol or Adderall or tobacco or sugar, to deal with our stress. We're an aging profession, so we have cognitive issues. Death by suicide is a major concern in the practice of law. In fact, and I'll get to it in the next slide, it is the third leading cause of death for lawyers in the United States after heart disease and cancer. And we also have problems with process addictions such as gambling, eating disorders, porn, sex, things like that. It is because we're doing things that help our brain relax in an unhealthy way. So one thing we're going to talk about is how to do things in our lives that allow our brain to have the parasympathetic system activated, and we'll get to that with our tools. So these are some statistics. Like I said before, lawyers have one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession. Lawyers are statistically 400% more likely to have depression than the general population. We have 21% of lawyers have reported as having reached the category of problematic drinking, which is 300 to 400% higher than the general population. We're almost twice the level of problem drinking than other professions. What's interesting, and the statistics show that almost a third of lawyers under 30 qualify as problematic or hazardous drinking. Now, this is something we can discuss, but my opinion is, from my personal experience, the lawyers that are my age, that we all grew up, and I say grew up practicing law, drinking as being the norm, but we may not be as comfortable to admit that as younger lawyers. So whether or not lawyers under 30 actually are more of them are having problem drinking, or whether or not they're just more willing to report it and admit to it, that's something that I'm not sure about, but my opinion is they're more likely to admit to it. So this is a survey done of law students. There were several surveys done. Hazelden, American Bar Association, did a survey of lawyers in 2016. Bloomberg did a survey in 2022. University of Chicago's done surveys, and we'll talk about some of these surveys. This was a survey done of law students back in 2014 and 2021. And you can see, I don't know, some of you may have been law students back in 2021 or 2014 when the survey was done. But it shows that 21 was during the pandemic, but a lot of these statistics almost doubled. Depression went up from 18% to 33%, anxiety 21% to 40%. The only statistic that went down was self-reported binge drinking. The authors postulated that binge drinking went down because it was less likely to binge drink by yourself during the pandemic. You're not going out to bars or parties with others, and that was the opinion of the author. So here, this is the University of Chicago study. Again, during the pandemic, almost over 3/4 of the lawyers surveyed reported feeling symptoms of burned out. Now the questions weren't in the other surveys, are you a problem drinker or are you burned out? They asked questions of symptoms of behavior that meet the criteria of burnout or meet the criteria of a hazardous or problematic drinker or having a substance use disorder. So here, 42% reported unhealthy or hazardous substance use. It wasn't, do you have an unhealthy substance use? They just asked, how often do you do it? What do you do? What do you drink? What do you use? Now, what was interesting, the survey done by the American Bar Association was anonymous. It was sent out to almost 13,000 lawyers nationwide. Some questions were about drug use, and some questions were asked about illegal drug use. The questions about the illegal drug use, 75% of the lawyers, even though it was anonymous, refused to answer the question, which makes me think about the amount of substance use disorder, the amount of drug use in the survey was severely underreported because of the refusal to answer the questions. So there are other statistics that we can talk about, but I want to get to burnout for a second. Before we start shifting towards burnout, I want to share a little joke that I think is relevant. If you've heard it before, let me know. So the joke goes that there's 5 passengers in an airplane. Right? The pilot calls back and says, we have a problem. The plane is crashing and there's only 5 parachutes and I'm taking one. So we got the 5 passengers. We got the president of the United States at the time of the joke, the vice president, the so-called smartest, most intelligent person in the world, a priest and a Boy Scout. So the president gets up, says, there's 5 of us and only 4 parachutes left. My life has to be saved. I'm the leader of the free world. So the president takes a parachute and jumps. Vice president gets up and says, I'm the vice president of the United States, the second most important person in the free world. Anything happens to the president, my life has to be saved. Takes a parachute and jumps. The most intelligent person in the world stands up and says, there's 3 of us left. There's only 2 parachutes. I need one. I'm the most intelligent person. The Far East, the Middle East, all the different crises in the world cannot be solved without my intellect. Jumps. The priest then looks at the Boy Scout and says, my son, I've lived a full life. You can have the last parachute and save your life. The Boy Scout says, Father, don't worry about it. The most intelligent person in the world just jumped off the plane with my backpack. And so the moral of that story, in my opinion, in relationship to burnout, in relationship to mental health issues in the practice of law, is that intelligence is not an antidote. And in fact, intelligence, at least according to psychologists, is a liability, especially for lawyers who were trained to solve other people's problems. We're trained, so we believe that we can solve our own problems. We believe that we don't need help. And that's a falsehood, but that's a conditioning that we need to work on as a community. And so it reminds me of a quote by Albert Einstein. He once said, you can't solve a problem from the same level of thinking that caused the problem. And what I take from that is if my self-centeredness or if my fears are causing my problems, then my self-centeredness or my fears cannot solve the problem. I need to call somebody. I need to get help. I need to speak with a therapist, or I need to speak to a friend, or I need to speak to a clergy. I need to speak to someone else to get a different perspective, because I'm in a place that I caused myself to get to this place, and I can't get out of it. And that was me. As I shared before, I was in a place that was treatable, yet my fear of anyone knowing I needed help made it worse and worse and worse, rather than treating it as it was. And so now we're going to talk a little about specifically about burnout. And if you have questions as we go along, feel free. These are some of the symptoms that I had at the time that I was ashamed for anyone to know about. And now it's interesting. I'm not only not ashamed of them, I talk about it. I'm sharing things with you publicly that just 7 years ago, I was unwilling to tell anyone, even a mental health professional, because of my fears. So I had difficulty separating my personal, professional life. My whole identity was tied, my self-worth was tied to being not just a lawyer, but being a winning lawyer. I was starting to lose cases for the first time in my career. The laws started changing, especially the medical malpractice laws. This is around 2007 through 2009, 2010. And I wasn't very good at adapting. I was, because of my disease, I was becoming increasingly frustrated and irritable. I started it's called depersonalization of clients and situations. What I did in hindsight, I didn't realize it at the time, and if anybody can relate to this, I was objectifying my clients. They would come to me in deep distress, going through personal, financial, physical trauma, and all I was doing is thinking, can I make money? They were objects, they were commodities. And if either I could or I couldn't. And I dehumanized, if you will, the situation. And that was a defense mechanism that was unhealthy. I didn't enjoy my work as much. I was becoming less effective. I was becoming less confident. When I'm not as effective, I'm not as confident. And then this is the part that leads to a lot of people to self-medicate. I had an increased desire to escape. But before I had the desire to escape or flee or isolate, I had an increased desire to fight. And so I used initially to fight, to keep competing. And then I used it to flight. And then I used it to freeze or isolate. And again, I don't know when that transitioned, but this is what the World Health Organization specifies as 3 major components of burnout, especially in the legal world. Feeling of an energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativity and cynicism related to one's job. So I went from skeptical to cynical. I remember that. A sense of ineffectiveness or a lack of accomplishment, like we were talking about. Burnout, this is what's interesting and what we don't realize, which I didn't realize that I want to emphasize, can be a healthy bodily human response to when some of our human needs are not being met. If you struggle with burnout, it is not a sign of a personal failure. That's what I want to emphasize. It is described as a chemical burnout, describes when a fire runs out of fuel and reduces to nothing. So occupationally, burnout is described as a special type of work-related stress, a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. This is according to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. So why am I talking so much about burnout, and why do we want to talk about it more? Well, for several reasons. One, as we talked about statistically, back in 2022, almost over 3/4 of all lawyers reported being burned out. The Bloomberg study talked about over 50% of lawyers that were interviewed reported symptoms consistent of burnout. And another reason it's important is, as we're going to talk about in a minute, both from a personality standpoint and environmentally, lawyers in particular are particularly sensitive or predisposed to burnout. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But another reason that burnout is important, it's important to be aware of it and to treat it healthily in a healthy manner, is because the psychologists say, that lawyers, once they're exhibiting signs of burnout, have a 500 to 800% increased likelihood of having a substance use disorder. The psychologists state that the reason for that is because as a profession, like I was talking about before, we're less likely to ask for help. And so we're more likely to self-medicate, whether it's go get a prescription of Adderall or to smoke cigarettes or to go drink or take other medications. We're more likely to drink our stress away than to seek help and other healthy tools. So this is something to be aware of. And so we were talking about secondary trauma, but there are several personality traits that aren't unique to lawyers, but lawyers seem to have. And those are the personality traits of perfectionism, pessimism, and then sometimes we're considered to be control freaks. We try to control outcomes. We're trying to control people. Like, for example, when I was trying lawsuits, I was the producer. I funded the lawsuit. I was the director. I directed what witnesses testified, what evidence came in. I was the lighting director. I was the editor. I edited the videos. I was also one of the actors because I'm on stage in court. So I'm trying to run the whole show, and it can be daunting, as I'm sure some of you have experienced as well. But we're also trying, and then perfectionism is different than optimalism or seeking of excellence. The experts talk about perfectionism is when no matter how good you do or how well you're doing something, you always have the negative self-talk that you didn't do good enough, or you didn't win enough, or you didn't get the result enough. It was more, it's also an attitude of what some experts talk about as masturbation. We must do it this way. We must do it that way, or we're a failure, and it's unhealthy. We're also maybe not inherently, but we're trained to be pessimists. In law school, we're trained to spot the issues, to spot the problems. As practicing lawyers, we're trained to anticipate the problems. So what's important about this, and then sometimes we're handling cases that are inconsistent with our core values, or sometimes the responsibility of zealously representing our clients may interfere with our other core values of being a good family person, or being a good friend, or sometimes with our integrity. So we have to practice doing the next right thing and being consistent with our core values as much as possible. So if you're in a situation where your job is inconsistent with your core values, if your job requires you to be pessimistic, to be good at it, your job promotes perfectionism, if your job has exposure to secondary trauma, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be burned out or have mental health problems or substance use problem, but it means that according to the experts, you're more predisposed. So it's good to be aware of that and then start taking actions if you can now to recognize that. So Here's an example of what I consider burnout. Before I get to these steps to address burnout, I want to share a analogy that helps me. So I played college tennis. I played basketball. I played soccer. I sprained my ankles a lot. When I sprained my ankle, initially in the beginning, I would have to ice it and rest it because your ankle, your ligaments are strained and they swell as a bodily reaction to being strained. And then if I kept running on them, more likely I made it worse and worse, or I subjected myself to risking breaking it. Burnout is a bodily response to having stress, to doing things inconsistent with your core values, of experiencing secondary trauma like we're talking about. So your emotions, as being strained, like your ligaments. So what you need to do, figuratively, when you're having these symptoms that we talked about before, the lack of motivation, increased irritability, less effectiveness, things like that, when you're more cynical, recognize them as a sprained ankle, that your body is strained, and then you got to figuratively ice and rest it. Now, after I sprained my ankle several times, what I would do is start taking precautions. What can I do ahead of time to what caused my burnout? What caused my sprained ankle, for example? Well, maybe I was running on uneven ground. Maybe I need to run in the future on a flat surface. So if you're doing something professionally inconsistent with your core values, you may want to look at that as like you're running on uneven ground. So you're going to be more likely to turn an ankle if you keep running on uneven ground. So try to find a profession or something, or a process where you can run on even ground. Well, maybe I had improper shoes. That's maybe having better shoes, better running shoes, maybe like having something in your life where you can have access to optimism, like maybe do charitable work, service work, help children, help with animals, coach Little League, whatever you think about, doing things where you can get outside of an environment that's pessimistic into an opportunity where there's optimism and hope and joy. These are things that I want you to think about. If you can come up with a better metaphor, I'd love to hear it, but this is what makes sense to me. So here, now we're going to start talking about some tools, some tips, approaches. So these are some, first thing you got to do is recognize what the symptoms are. Then you have to understand the underlying causes, like we talked about, the pessimism, the perfectionism, and the inconsistency with core values, and the exposure to secondary trauma. So you have to find these symptoms, the causes, and conditions. Again, want to emphasize that lawyer burnout is not a sign of failure. Spraining your ankle is not a sign of failure. But once you sprain your ankle or once you burn out, then you need to start recognizing it and how to take actions in the future to make it less likely to happen again. So awareness can be curative. So your practice, dealing with your clients, family law, criminal law, immigration law, personal injury law, are the areas that are particularly impacted by trauma. So that's something that you need to know about. So that's why it's more important to find things outside of that area or try to limit it. So what some people do in some areas like criminal law or family law, where there's traumatic videos or traumatic photographs or graphic evidence, they have it password protected on the computer, or the actual photographs, the hard copies, are in a special room with a lock on it. So the staff, the lawyers, are not exposed to it repeatedly over and over and over again. Limit your exposure if you can to graphic evidence like that. if you can. So these are different types of traumas that we heard about. Trauma is defined as exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. It can be physical, sexual, emotional. It can be it could be childhood neglect. It can be adult neglect. It could be poverty, racism, discrimination. It could be violence. There's lots of different types of trauma. And then when you have symptoms of burnout and you have symptoms of trauma, it can lead to compassion fatigue. Like I was sharing with you, I didn't know it at the time, but I had a little bit of both. So there's a little bit of overlap. Burnout, you don't have to be necessarily exposed to trauma to be burned out. But compassion fatigue is essentially little symptoms of burnout plus exposure to primary trauma. What's interesting to know that you made is the DSM-5 a couple years ago has included vicarious or secondary trauma as a cause for post-traumatic stress disorder. So you or someone else can be and has been, people have been diagnosed with PTSD without any direct trauma, but with a repeated exposure to other people's or secondary trauma. So it's important to try to be aware of that and limit if possible. So these are some of the symptoms of compassion fatigue. If you or anybody you know is having these symptoms, they're not necessarily diagnostic because they're consistent with other diagnoses. I'm not here to diagnose you, but if you're having increased anger or increased apathy, or you're sleeping less, or you're feeling more, if you're not taking care of yourself as well, if you're isolating more, if you're having more forgetfulness or lack of focus, these are all symptoms of compassion fatigue. It also could be symptoms of depression. It could be symptoms of other things, excuse me, but they're important to know about so you can then ask for help. So this is important because being lawyer well-being is an important part of a lawyer's ethical duty of competence. I'm reminded that Aristotle once said that our first wealth is our health, and being healthy allows us to not only be a better human being, a better lawyer, a better family member, better part of the community. So, and it requires personal effort to have a long-term well-being. There's a concept that we want to be fit emotionally, spiritually, and physically, so we can be best able to take care of our clients and ourselves and our family members. This is about life balance. So when I talk about life balance as a potential antidote to mental health issues, I'm not talking about a 50-50. Balance doesn't have to be like the scales of justice. A life balance is more of a feeling that we experience when we sense that we are paying attention to and managing all aspects of our lives, our work, our physical and emotional health, our spirituality, and our relationships. Lawyer work-life balance is a process. I don't want you to look at it as a goal or try to maintain it as an outcome. It's dynamic. Things change. So what I mean by this is we want to be able to feel fulfillment. And fulfillment can come 90% from our work and 10% from the rest of our lives, or 10% from work and 90% from the rest of our lives. It could be 50-50. It's subjective. It's up to you. So you want to be working on your what's important to you. So life balance, in my opinion, is a key. Working on things that are consistent with your goals, But it's difficult for lawyers and law students because of, like I said, we also have ethical duties of zealous representation. Sometimes we have to deal with secondary and primary trauma. Sometimes we have long hours. We have high expectations by our clients and ourselves and by the courts. And so it is something that needs, you have to be cognitive of and work towards. So you want to have, like I said, you want to take care of yourself. So here's what I believe, and this is what the evidence shows, are strategies to perform, have better life balance, or to improve life balance. And I'm open for your ideas and suggestions as we go forward. So for the next 20 or 30 minutes, maybe we talk about what I think are healthy tools, sort of figurative ways to ice and rest your emotions if you're burning out, figurative ways and specific ways to try to change your environment, change your shoes, change the level of the ground, try to strengthen your ankle ahead of time, or figurative ways to strengthen your resilience ahead of time, so that you're less likely to burn out, becoming more aware of your personality traits. And then, but if you are going to burn out, don't look at it as a sign of failure, but what to do about it when you have it. Like if you sprain your ankle, just ice and rest it for a couple of weeks and you'll be fine. Burnout is also like that. The research talks about once you get help, it's not a lifelong issue. You can get resolution and treatment quite quickly. Substance use disorders, like myself, that's a daily process. It's a one day at a time program, but I have a daily minimum regimen so I call it preventative spiritual, physical, and emotional health, that I'd be happy to talk about with you another time. But it's something that I do every day, and I try to build healthy micro habits. So we want to be able to help well, help others, as well as be willing to help ourselves. We want to be able to connect well, both mutual connection. We want to be able to move well, exercise, walking, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. We want to be able to love well. And what I mean by that is also be able to have self-compassion. Once you have self-compassion, you can have compassion for others. You want to learn how to breathe, meditate. You want to be able to have an attitude of gratitude. And then principles over priorities that we'll talk about. It's a way to be focusing on your values and on a process rather than on outcomes. So it's more a progress over perfection type of mentality. So I'm going to talk about these one at a time. And if you have questions, you can post them in the chat and I'll try to get to them. Or if you have some comments, love to see them. So the first one is health well. So research says that 80% of people suffering from depression get remission within 6 to 8 sessions of talk therapy, and 20% feel better. So everyone that's having symptoms of depression or been diagnosed with depression improve once they have a safe place to talk about it. Like I was mentioning earlier, you can talk out some of the things that are causing you to feel depressed. You're less likely to feel the shame and more likely to work on getting better. This is the quote by Einstein that I mentioned earlier, that you can't solve the problem I can't solve a problem from the same level of thinking that caused the problem. And so for me, there's also research, and we'll get to it, on moving well. Over 100,000 people were studied over quite a few years, over 10 years, on comparing people diagnosed with major depression who are on antidepressants. They took people off the antidepressants and had some of them walk from 6,000 steps to 12,000 steps a day. And the evidence showed that the people that walked a minimum of 6,000 steps a day, their symptoms of depression improved 150% more than the people who are on antidepressants and weren't walking. And so I'm not saying do not take antidepressants if it's prescribed, but the research shows that the being able to walk, especially out in nature where you get the vitamin D and you get to feel connected to the universe, helps with depression, according to that study. Also, research says that you're less likely to be depressed if you're being of service to others. Again, this gets and less likely to be burned out is because this is what we're talking about before. When you're constantly pessimistic and perfectionistic, you need to have, if you have an opportunity to be of service for others without trying to fix them, but just be useful to them, then that helps biologically. And so, for me, I try to, when I'm in a bad place, I try to call at least 3 people and ask them how they are doing without necessarily telling them about my problems. And it helps me. I also get very involved in the recovery community. I speak regularly. I try to share. I try to be of service to my family. I try to be service to my community. This is a big change from when I was trying cases when I didn't think I had time to be of service. Now, in my younger years, when I was practicing law, when I had symptoms of burnout, I didn't realize this at the time. But what I was doing, I was using some of the tools I'm telling you about unconsciously. I would be of service. I would coach my kids in Little League or soccer. I would be of service in the community, being the community coach, tennis or soccer, and things like that. I also would play tennis regularly. And I would be able to have social friendships with the people I play tennis with in a healthy way. I'd had social relationships with the parents of my children. So I was connecting with the community. I was activating my parasympathetic nervous system by playing tennis. I was activating my oxytocin, my ability to connect with people. And so those are things that we're talking about. Now, you can also ask for help and you can be of service. So I'm going to talk now in the concept of helping yourself and helping others. I'm going to talk for about next 5 minutes or so about TLAP, what we have to offer to be of help to you or for you to help TLAP or your colleagues. And then I'm going to talk about some of the other tools. So TLAP is statutorily confidential, according to Health and Safety Code. And we have specific resources available. And if you want, I can share more of these resources later, but we're available 24/7 for call or text. Our text service is being modified right now. So if you text us at 1-800-343-TLAP, we can't respond by text. We'll have to call you right now. And so, but it's confidential. If you do call us, I want you to know you don't have to call us in a crisis. You can call us just to get to know us, so you know what our resources are. You can call us to let us know how you're doing and to build tools or strategies for preventative mental health, like I talk about what part of my daily minimum regimen. You can call us about yourself confidentially, or a colleague or a friend. Staff members can call us about lawyers confidentially. We're here to be of service. If you know a lawyer, if you're a lawyer and you know another lawyer might be impaired, you have an ethical duty to report the lawyer to the bar, but you meet that ethical obligation by calling TLAP. You don't have to call the disciplinary department or the ethics department. You can call us, and then our purpose is to confidentially try to provide help, no punishment, no discipline. We have in the moment counseling, where if you call us and ask, I'd like to speak to somebody in the moment, we can transfer you promptly to a free licensed therapist. And you don't have to tell us who you are unless you want to. You don't have to tell us why you're calling. You just, whoever answers the phone, we all rotate to answering the phone. You can just say, I'd like to speak to someone in the moment, and we transfer you. Now, sometimes you may hear this recording like you hear other times when you call different services, that this might be recorded for training purposes. If that bothers you, let us know, because we can't control that, and then we'll try to get you to a licensed therapist that does not record. That's another option we have. We have attorney recommended mental health professionals, psychologists, therapists, social workers, and all across the state that we can match you based on what you're going through, or we can help match a colleague. We have group support. There's another group that's affiliated with TLAP. That's not part of TLAP, but it's like our sister organization. It's called the Texas Lawyers Concern for Lawyers, or LCL, Lawyers Concern for Lawyers. On our website, at the top left-hand corner, there's a box that has a link. It says lawyer/law student support meetings. If you click that, you'll get a list of all the meetings statewide. There's a half a dozen that meet on Zoom every week. There's one out of Austin that's every Tuesday at noon. There's one every Monday night. There's one every Thursday out of Dallas. The one every Monday, there's two different on Monday night, one through Texas Lawyers Wellness, a Facebook group, and there's one, a depression group out of Dallas every Monday night. And then there's Dallas has one every Thursday at noon. And then Lubbock and Tarrant County has two separate meetings every Friday at noon. And then we also have student support sessions and one-on-one local peer support, which means if you or a friend or a colleague are in recovery or remission for burnout or depression or a bipolar or drinking or drugging or smoking, you've recovered from one of these conditions, and you want to help other lawyers who are going through what you've overcome, you can call us and you can become one of our volunteers to help. So if someone calls up and says, I'm going through a difficult time, this is what I'm going through, I'd like to, do you have somebody that's gone through what I'm going through? I'd like to talk with them. And then they will meet with you confidentially under the TLAP statute for coffee or lunch or whatever. They talk with you, FaceTime you, and help you either find meetings or find therapy or find a group or a community, or just share their experience, strength, and hope. That helped me. So briefly, when I was at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and I was in a really dark place, I personally reached out to the Minnesota Lawyers Assistance Program and the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. It took me several years to have the courage to do that. I wish I did it sooner, but I did it. And when I was and a lawyer in Minnesota drove 2 hours to meet me for lunch at the Mayo Clinic Hospital cafeteria. And we talked. He gave me hope. He gave me direction. And to this day, Greg and I are really close friends. And I am very grateful for that opportunity. And so I'm a very big proponent of the value of one lawyer talking to another lawyer, one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, one depressive talking to another lawyer depressive, so we can understand each other in a better way. And that helped me a lot. We have information on our website, self-care information. We have videos. We have lawyer success stories. We have, like I said, volunteer opportunities. And I'll get to at the next slide. We also have we have a trust that we'll get to in the next slide, but we also have CLEs. In addition to this continuing legal education, TLAP offers 2 1-hour free ethics CLEs every month. If you need ethics CLEs, if it's convenient, or if you're interested, every second Monday at noon, we have a lawyer who is in recovery or in remission for a mental health or substance use problem, who has the courage to share their journey with TLAP and the state bar. And you get the privilege of listening to that story and get 1 hour free ethics to be part of that lawyer's journey. And then every 4th Wednesday from 12 to 1, this is all on Zoom. You get to listen to a mental health professional speak about a topic germane to the practice of law. And that's also, both of these free ethics CLEs you can register at TLAP Help's Facebook page, or you can call Penny Wood, our administrative assistant, at 1-800-343-TLAP-8527. Just ask to register, and she will send you the link, or she will register for you, and you'll get an email reminder so you can join like you did today. And then the trust that I was talking about, if whatever reason you don't have insurance, or you have insurance and it doesn't cover behavioral or mental health care, or you do have insurance that covers it, but at the moment you don't have the liquidity to pay for the deductible or out-of-pocket expenses, we can get you up to $3,000 for free for outpatient counseling and medication, $4,000 for what's called intensive outpatient, which is like an 8-week, 3 times a week intensive program of group therapy, or $10,000 for residential or inpatient care. I'm a product of not the trust, but I went through all 3 levels on my own. I went to residential care at the Mayo Clinic. I did the intensive outpatient treatment at the Mayo Clinic, and then I did continuing counseling and therapy at the Mayo Clinic. So I can attest that these things help me. And so this is available. The only criteria is, in addition to the financial situation I shared with you, is to have a mental health or substance use issue. That's it. So you either have to have diagnosed with depression, bipolar, ADHD, anxiety, or if you want to stop drinking or drugging or smoking or gambling, something like that. So now I'm going to switch back to some of the tools. We were talking about how asking for help is helpful. Being of service, like I was talking about, helps change your brain. There is a chemical in our brain called oxytocin, as opposed to OxyContin. Oxytocin is the connection or love chemical in our brain. It has been proven by research that when this chemical is activated, it can be an antidote for pain. It can be an antidote for depression. And I can give you a personal example. I had surgery, major surgery at the Mayo Clinic back in July of 2019. And like I shared with you, one of my addictions was opioids because of my pain. And so I was off of opioids for about a year at that point in time. But I was going to have major surgery and be in a lot of pain, and the doctor prescribed OxyContin for pain. So I was fearful. I woke up from the surgery in excruciating pain. But there was a friend of mine in Minnesota who was sitting at the foot of my bed. Her name was Amy. She was a farmer from small town in Minnesota. I met her in treatment, and she was smiling at me. To this day, and her smile gave me the strength to say no to the pain pills. I was able to manage through this major operation with only Tylenol. I can only explain that personally is that the chemical of oxytocin kicked in, And that gave me the strength and to deal and to deal with the pain and the sadness and depression I was in, because I was still in early recovery, and I was living in Minnesota alone. I had a lot of things going on, but I didn't take any pain meds. So if you're going through a difficult time, what helped me is being willing to say, I'm going through a difficult time. I shared with Amy, and she was there for me. So that was really helpful. Her service to me maybe saved my life, because if I took oxy, I might not be alive today. I may not be here with you. So I'm very grateful for that. Then the next issue we talked about helping well is connecting well. And that leads to what I was talking about with Amy. Trying to seek opportunities to connect with friends, with colleagues, try to have mutual care for each other. Our profession is quite adversarial. We need to seek opportunities to help each other, because every one of us at one time or another is going to be in a very dark place, but not at the same time. So when someone's in a dark place and we're not, it's really important for you to be there, for me to be available for them, and for them to be available for me. There is a power in connection. Brene Brown defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from that relationship. So I didn't know it at the time, but if you think about it, when I was in that hospital bed and all that pain, Amy sitting there there was an energy that existed between us that helped me feel valued. It allowed me to receive, and she gave without judgment, and she gave me the sustenance and strength. I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's what happened in part. So I'm very grateful to this day for that. So I need to seek that out. So to connect well, we want to create opportunities to be with people that have the similar values than we have. Another quote by Einstein that I like is, "You are the product of the 5 people you spend most of your time with." And I know from past experience, when I was around, quote, hard charging, very aggressive trial lawyers that were, I became more like them, less empathetic, less caring, more hard driven. Now I try to be around people that are kind, loving, compassionate, and I'm grateful that I think I am becoming more of the product now of the people I spend time with. So once you determine your values that we'll get to in a minute, I think it's important to find people that have the same values you have, so you will help each other. You also need to, it's also helpful, I suggest, to find people that you can talk with, whether I go to 12-step meetings, I go to other recovery support meetings where I can process what I'm going through. You can talk, whether it's through a therapist, a clergy, a good friend. It's really important to have a safe place that you can talk about what you're going through humanly, as humans, because we're all humans first and lawyers second. So this is what I was talking about. Having the ability to share with someone else about what has happened or is going on is meaningful. It's important to find somebody that you can trust and talk with. With regard to connecting well, I have a couple of slides on boundaries that I want to talk about briefly. One is, for me, Boundaries are not only what you let in, but also what you let out. It's bilateral. Boundaries are also important to be consistent, reasonable, and visible. And they exist whether we communicate them or not verbally. So you want to be able to find boundaries that you respect. So with regard to boundaries, in my opinion, boundaries are not a question of saying no to people. Boundaries are an issue of saying yes to your values, to saying yes to what's important to you. So if getting ready for trial and being a zealous representative of your client is important to you as part of your values, then sometimes you have to say no to other obligations. If your family obligations are the most important to you, and you have something, your boss asks you to do something at Friday night at 6 o'clock, and you agree to be home for dinner, or your child has an orchestra concert, then you're saying yes to your child or to your family. You're not saying no to work. So it's a different perspective that, and I suggest that if you have reasonable and personal values that are, and you enforce them, people will respect you more. I've noticed that for me, because, and then they'll honor them more because they're enforced consistently. So you want to be able to live your life in a clear, consistent, purposeful way. So this gets to the third one. We got help well, we got connect well, we got prioritize the principles over priorities. Then the last two will be move well and love well. So principles are our core values. Our principles should be foundational, objective, and constant. Our priorities are our goals. And a goal could be getting ready for a deposition, getting ready for a hearing, or winning a hearing. But our goals are ever changing, they're subjective, and they're transient. If, for example, your principle is integrity, but you have a priority to win a hearing, and the judge asks you a question that the truth of the answer may cause you to lose the hearing, you tell the truth because your value is integrity. And over the long term, the judges will respect you more and you'll win more hearings because the judge will know that you're a person of your word. So that's an example. If you don't prioritize principles over priorities, you can get internal stress. You can internally get trauma. You can internally feel guilt. And it reminds me that Mahatma Gandhi once said, happiness is when our thoughts, our words, and our deeds are harmonious with our values. And so it's things that for me to think about. So again, our values should be guiding principles that will help you make good decisions in the face of uncertainty or powerful emotions like fear or anger. So if you're in a situation, and like I said, you're afraid of losing a hearing, and you know it's important, but if your values are honesty, integrity, then it makes it an easier decision to have the courage to overcome that fear. So those are some thoughts. These are some values for lawyers. These are some of my suggestions for values. You can come up with your own. For me, my values are to be honest. My values to be open-minded. My values to be willing. My values to try to be teachable. I have values of trying to be spiritually fit, physically fit, and things like that, and being transparent with my family and my spouse or my partner. So these are values, suggested values. The next two are going to be move well and then how to love well. And we got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes left. So I'll try to finish quickly, at least time for questions. So we have the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Real quickly, the sympathetic is the fight or flight. That was my nervous system that was activated when I burned out and when I was in physical pain. that led me to self-medicate, which made things much, much worse. I went to fight and then flight. And like I said, when I was when I may have burned out when I was younger, but I had the outlet of playing tennis or the outlet of being of service to my children, I was activating my parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest system. So these are some suggestions on how to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. I believe these slides will be available to you if you want to read them, watch them, if you want to call me and check in. My email is paul.jacobs@tlaphelps.org. That's paul.jacobs@tlaphelps.org, and be happy to talk to you more if you want. But I personally, I walk, hike, I play golf on a regular basis. I don't play as much tennis anymore because of some of my physical injuries. I try to concentrate on being mindful. I try to meditate on a regular basis. So I found things. I try to cook in a mindful way. So these are things you may want to think about. One psychiatrist says that if you find something you like to do, whether it's cooking, gardening, swimming, hiking, anything that you like to do, try to do it and activate as many, if not all of your senses at the same time. Your sense of sight, your sense of smell, your sense of hearing, your sense of touch. Try to use all your senses at the same time, and your brain automatically is in the present moment, and you activate your parasympathetic nervous system automatically. So you may want to experiment with that. There's also research I talked about earlier about the benefits of walking. Walking not only helps with depression, it helps with your heart disease and everything like that. It helps with your whole body. The research says that if you walk 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day, you'll add up to 5 to 7 years to your life. So, because it also gets you out of the house. So now the last one is, how do we love well? How do we breathe well? In my opinion, loving well is having an attitude of gratitude, as opposed to an attitude of entitlement. So studies have demonstrated that at the brain level, moral judgments involving feelings of gratefulness are evoked in the right interior temporal cortex. The effects of gratitude when practiced daily can be almost the same as medications. It produces a feeling in your brain of lasting happiness and contentment. Willie Nelson once said, when I started counting my blessings, my whole life turned around. So whenever I've noticed in the past, if I'm in a situation where I might be resenting a client, or might be resenting the judge, or might be resenting some situation at work or in life, if I can shift my focus to what am I grateful for in the moment, grateful for being licensed to practice law, grateful for having the privilege of representing a client in the courtroom, grateful for whatever that's in your, if you can change your mind, grateful for being not in pain. I have that gratitude often, grateful that I'm clean and sober today. It changes my whole perspective, and I'm in a position of being more loving, more caring, more kind than in an attitude of fear. And so that helps me. There are being compassionate for lawyers is not easy, but we want to take ourselves not so seriously. We want to laugh more. We want to joke more. We want to seek opportunities for joy. We want to practice a consistency over intensity and practice progress over perfection. And then lastly, we want to be able to meditate and breathe. I'd say meditate. Mindfulness is not necessarily a relaxation technique. If I can be mindful in the moment, I'm more aware, I'm more present, I'm more available. When I meditate, I'm using meditation to be able to become more of an observer rather than a reactor. To be a good lawyer, in my opinion, it needs you to be able to respond as opposed to react. And if we can be mindful and not to believe every thought that comes into our head, and to be able to be present for the situation, we'll be able to respond and be a better advocate for our clients, be a better family member, be a better parent, spouse, child, a sibling, friend. And with that, the last one is suggestions for box breathing, where you can breathe. If anyone needs some help, box breathing for me is to be able to picture a square or a rectangle in my mind, and you breathe 4 to 5 seconds on one side of the square or rectangle, hold for 4 to 5 seconds, breathe out on the top of the rectangle square for 4 to 5 seconds, hold, and then breathe in. You just go around the square. And if you can just do that before a hearing, before an argument, before a deposition, before meeting with a client, before dealing with a child, it only takes 20 to 30 seconds to go around the square, and it'll help you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and you're more able to, again, respond and not react. So these are some resources for well-being that you'll have access to. And this is our QR code to TLAP. If you have any questions, it goes right to our website. So we have 5 minutes left. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And my name is Paul Jacobs, and I'll turn the floor over to Natalie. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you so much. I want to just take a moment to kind of recognize the vulnerability and profound courage that you are showing to us, what you've given to us. It's really a gift. And and to those who care about us and the profession generally, I just want to acknowledge you for just stating the truth, for opening to suffering, stigma, all of that that's necessary for healing. So thank you for modeling to us how to be open to healing and the benefits that come from
Thank you.
that radical honesty that you're giving us. It's moving, it's inspiring. Congratulations on your anniversary coming up. What an accomplishment. Thank you for sharing it with us. And you really give me hope for our profession. So thank you.